Rain hammered against the metal sign, turning the word Toy Haven into a rhythmic, metallic clatter that echoed across the empty street. Thunder rolled, a low vibration that shook the pavement under their boots. Ryan whipped his camera out, thumbing the record button with a practiced, sharp motion. He stepped into the downpour, ignoring the water soaking into his skin. "What is up, guys? We are at the haunted toy shop," Ryan shouted over the wind, his grin wide and fixed. Behind him, Jake stood hunched, his teeth audibly chattering in the cold. He gripped his own shoulders, staring at the darkened storefront with wide, darting eyes. "Ryan, this place smells like old socks and bad vibes. Can we go?" Jake whispered, his voice barely cutting through the gusts. Ryan did not look back. He wiped a streak of rain from the camera lens, his focus entirely on the heavy wooden door ahead. He ignored the shivering, ignored the warning in the air, and planted his hand firmly against the wood. The lock clicked. The shop interior waited in a silence that felt heavier than the storm. The heavy wood yielded with a long, agonizing creak that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Ryan stepped over the threshold, his flashlight beam cutting a sharp, dusty path through the dark. The noise of the rain vanished instantly, replaced by a suffocating, stagnant silence. He swung the light wide. The room opened up into a graveyard of forgotten playthings. Dust motes danced in the artificial glare, swirling like tiny ghosts around rows of porcelain dolls. They sat on shelves, on the floor, and perched on broken stools, their unblinking eyes fixed on the entrance as if they had been waiting for visitors. Ryan stepped deeper, his boots crunching on fragments of glass. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of stagnant air and decaying paper. Jake moved in behind him, his footsteps tentative and light, his gaze darting between the staring porcelain faces. Every shadow seemed to stretch, twisting into long, jagged shapes against the peeling wallpaper. Ryan moved the camera slowly, panning across the rows of motionless figures. The stillness was absolute. Not a single sound escaped the corners of the room. It was a place where time had stalled, leaving behind only the cold, hard stares of 1,000 glass eyes. A shelf groaned above them, the metal brackets shrieking as they tore away from the rotting wood. Ryan swung his light upward just in time to see a ragged teddy bear tumble into the air. It hit the floorboards with a soft, heavy thud right at their feet, its stuffing spilling from a jagged tear in its side. Ryan crouched, the camera lens inches from the toy. One eye was missing, a dark socket of frayed thread, but the other burned with a distinct, unnatural red glow that pierced the gloom. Jake took a sharp step back, his heel catching on a discarded block. He did not say a word, his breath hitching in his throat as he watched the bear. Ryan reached out, his fingers hovering over the matted fur before he pressed firmly against the toy's chest. For a heartbeat, there was only the hum of the camera's internal mic. Then, the shop lights vanished. The beam of Ryan's flashlight died. The pale glow of the bear's eye flickered once and extinguished. Total, suffocating darkness swallowed the room, leaving them blinded in a space that had suddenly become alive with the sound of settling dust. The darkness was absolute, pressing against their eyes like a physical weight. Ryan held his breath, the silence so dense it felt as if the air had turned to liquid. Beside him, Jake's shallow, rapid breathing was the only proof he wasn't alone. Then, the silence broke. A soft, rhythmic clicking echoed from the far corner of the room. It was precise, mechanical, and far too close. Each click vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up through the soles of their boots. Ryan reached out, his hands sweeping through empty air, but he found nothing. The teddy bear was gone. The clicking accelerated, shifting from a slow crawl to a frantic, staccato beat. Jake let out a low, involuntary whimper that cut through the gloom. Before he could move, a sudden, piercing clap erupted inches from his ear. It was sharp, metallic, and impossibly loud. Jake screamed, the sound tearing through the shop as he lunged forward, colliding with a shelf. The rhythmic clicking stopped, replaced by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. They were not alone in the dark, and whatever was moving toward them had finally found its target. A mechanical whine surged from the shadows, growing into a high-pitched drone that vibrated in their teeth. From the darkness, a dozen silhouettes detached themselves from the walls. They were robots, their metal joints shrieking with every stiff, jerky step they took toward the center of the aisle. Ryan swung his camera blindly, the red recording light blinking like a pulse in the gloom. The ground began to shake. A deep, rhythmic chugging sound emerged from the back of the shop, accelerating into a roar. A toy train, its headlight dead but its engine burning with heat, barreled down the narrow track like a runaway locomotive. It smashed through a stack of wooden crates, sending splinters flying into the air. Ryan shouted, his voice cracking as he shoved Jake toward the side wall. The robots marched in perfect, terrifying unison, their pincers snapping at the air. The train surged past, the wind from its passage whipping their hair. There was no room to stand, no space to breathe. They turned and ran, boots thumping against the floor as the mechanical horde closed the distance, the floorboards groaning under the weight of the metal assault. The air filled with whistling projectiles. Porcelain dolls launched from the shelves, their hard, painted limbs clipping the walls and shattering on the floorboards. Ryan ducked, a doll's head grazing his shoulder before it embedded itself into the wood behind him. The shop felt like a collapsing structure, every corner launching debris. Jake sprinted ahead, his boots hitting a slick patch of loose marble scattered across the center aisle. He lost his balance instantly, his arms windmilling as his feet slid out from under him. He hit the ground with a heavy thud, his momentum carrying him directly into a bucket of neon green slime. The container tipped, drenching him in the thick, glowing, viscous liquid. Jake gasped, clawing at the floor, but his palms found no purchase on the slick, slime-coated wood. He tried to scramble upright, yet his hands slipped, forcing him back down into the mess. The dolls continued to rain down, smashing into the floor around him. Ryan lunged forward, grabbing Jake by the back of his collar, but the floor remained a treacherous, shifting hazard. The room was a blur of motion, neon light, and the relentless sound of breaking ceramic. The crashing of broken ceramic ceased. A sudden, heavy stillness descended upon the shop, thicker than the dust. Ryan pulled his hands back, his breath hitching in his chest. A massive shadow detached itself from the back wall, rising toward the ceiling until it blocked the dim light from the street. It was a teddy bear, hulking and misshapen, its fur matted with age. It stood at least 7 feet tall, dwarfing the counters and the aisles. Then, the eyes ignited. 2 points of piercing, brilliant red light cut through the gloom like traffic signals in a storm. The creature did not charge. It stepped forward with a slow, deliberate thud that vibrated through the floorboards, pinning the boys against the base of the main counter. Every movement of its head was jerky, mechanical, and predatory. Jake pressed himself into the corner, his back hard against the wood, his eyes fixed on the blazing red gaze. There was nowhere left to run. The exit was blocked by the creature's sheer mass. It towered over them, blocking out the last of the shop's flickering lights. It tilted its head, a rhythmic, grinding sound emanating from its throat, and reached out a massive, clawed hand. The boys held their breath, trapped in the freezing reach of its shadow. The bear's clawed hand descended, fingers twitching with a metallic, grinding rhythm. Ryan watched the shadow widen, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He saw a gap behind the main counter, a sliver of space between the heavy wood and the wall. He shoved Jake hard, forcing him toward the opening. "Move!" Ryan yelled, lunging forward just as the creature's hand slammed into the counter surface. The impact splintered the edge, sending shards of debris flying into his face. Ryan scrambled, his hands sliding over the dusty floor, and dove into the narrow space behind the counter. He scrambled to his knees, his fingers frantically sweeping over the dark, cluttered surface of the desk. He felt metal, paper, And then, a smooth, heavy device. He gripped it. It was cold to the touch. A golden remote. He saw the red button, centered and glowing with a faint, pulsing light. The bear's shadow loomed over the counter, the floorboards groaning under its weight. Ryan did not hesitate. He jammed his thumb down onto the button with all his remaining strength. The sound of the shop, the whirring gears, the mechanical clatter, the screeching of metal on wood snapped off in an instant. A sudden, absolute void of sound swallowed the room. The air grew still. The movement stopped. The heavy silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then, a sharp, rhythmic click echoed from the rafters. A disco ball descended from the ceiling, its mirrored surface catching a hidden spotlight that surged to life. A deep, funky bass line thrummed through the floorboards, vibrating against their boots. The giant teddy bear, once a looming predator, froze mid-reach. Its mechanical neck jerked, and it began to slide backward across the dusty floor. It was moonwalking. Ryan climbed slightly over the counter, his mouth open, his camera still clutched in his hand. Beside him, Jake slowly peeled his face away from his knees, blinking at the sight. All around them, the room came alive with a different energy. The porcelain dolls on the shelves began to twitch in time with the beat, their stiff limbs jerking into breakdance spins. The wooden floor became a stage. The giant bear dipped, spun, and glided, its red eyes now flashing in sync with the disco lights. The terror that had gripped the room evaporated, replaced by a surreal, chaotic rhythm. Jake stood up, wiping dust from his arms, his jaw loose. They were no longer being hunted. They were spectators at a bizarre, rhythmic performance. The shop, once a graveyard of forgotten toys, pulsed with a relentless, groovy energy that made the very air feel light. A man stepped from the rear of the shop, his presence calm amidst the mechanical chaos. He adjusted his frames and looked at the dancing bear. "You broke the curse with a groove," he said, his voice barely rising above the bass. Ryan did not listen to the details. He swiveled the camera, framing the breakdancing dolls and the moonwalking bear. 10 million views. Here we come, he yelled, the digital counter on his screen ticking upward with impossible speed. Below the video, comments flooded in, thousands of users demanding a sequel to the madness. Jake shook his head, his hands still trembling as he stepped toward the door. "No more haunted houses, Ryan," he muttered, not looking back at the rhythmic display. Ryan laughed, his grip firm on the camera, keeping the lens fixed on the spectacle until the very last second. He pushed the heavy door open, letting the cool night air wash away the smell of dust and old plastic. They stepped onto the sidewalk together. Behind them, the shop lights continued to pulse with disco energy, but the boys walked away, leaving the mechanical rhythm to fade into the distance. Ryan held the camera high, watching the view count climb as they disappeared into the darkness of the city streets.